April 12, 1945. Southern Germany. First Lieutenant Everett Langford felt the P-51 Mustang shudder as flak tore through the wing, metal screaming, the aircraft bucking beneath his hands like something alive and dying. 75th mission, the number hammered in his mind with each violent shake. Supposed to be heading home today, supposed to finally meet the son whose photograph he carried over his heart. The engine coughed black smoke across the canopy, altitude dropping fast. The mission briefing that morning felt like years ago now, the other pilots clapping him on the back, joking about buying him drinks stateside. Below, the German countryside spread in patches of brown and green, forests thick enough to kill him, fields that might offer a chance. His hands moved through emergency procedures with practiced precision, even as his mind raced ahead to what came after the crash, if there was an after. The aircraft fell through 3,000 feet, 2,000. The radio crackled with voices from his squadron already miles away, completing the mission he'd never finish. He thought of Emily's last letter, creased and read so many times the words had blurred. She'd maimed the baby Thomas. He tried to picture holding him, couldn't quite manage it through the vibration rattling his teeth. 1,000 feet. The field rushed up uneven and scarred with shell craters. This was going to hurt. The P-51 hit hard, belly first, tearing across frozen earth in a shower of sparks and torn metal. The harness cut into Langford's shoulders as the world became noise and violence, and the sick certainty that the fuel tanks would ignite. But they didn't. The aircraft slewed sideways, dug a wing into soft ground, and stopped with a final shriek of tortured aluminum. Silence followed, ringing in his ears. He was alive. The realization felt almost absurd. Langford punched the canopy release with shaking hands. It stuck. He hit it again, harder, and it popped free. Cold air rushed in, sharp with the smell of aviation fuel and scorched metal. He hauled himself out, legs weak, and dropped to the ground. The Mustang lay broken behind him, one wing crumpled, the other pointing at the sky like an accusation. Smoke rose from the engine, cowling in lazy spirals. He needed to move. Germans would have seen the crash. SS patrols would be coming. He ran toward the tree line, legs finding strength despite the bruising. The forest swallowed him in shadow and the crackle of dead leaves. Behind him, voices rose in German. He pushed deeper into the woods, branches whipping his face, flight suit catching on thorns. His survival kit banged against his hip. Maps, compass, water tablets. The Colt .45 that wouldn't do much good against a patrol. The voices grew louder. Dogs barking. He changed direction, angling away from the sound, moving as quietly as training allowed. The village appeared through the trees without warning. Small houses with steep roofs, smoke rising from chimneys in the afternoon light. Too close to the crash site, too dangerous. But he had no choice. Darkness would come soon, and the temperature would drop below freezing. He circled to approach from the south, watching for movement. An older woman crossed the street carrying a basket. 2 children played near a well. Normal life, impossibly normal, while he crouched in the trees like a criminal. He spotted the barn at the village edge, separated from the nearest house by a vegetable garden gone dormant for winter. The structure looked old but solid, with gaps between the boards wide enough to see through. No lights, no movement. Langford waited 10 minutes, watching, listening. The patrol sounds had faded to the east. He moved low and fast across the open ground, expecting shouts or shots, but reached the barn door without incident. It opened with a creak that seemed loud enough to wake the dead. Inside, the smell of old hay and machine oil. Dim light filtered through the wall gaps, illuminating farm equipment that looked like it hadn't moved in years. A workbench covered in tools, empty stalls. He climbed into the loft and burrowed into the hay, pulling it over himself, heart still hammering. Safe, for now, maybe. He closed his eyes and saw Thomas's face in the photograph, tiny and wrinkled and utterly dependent on a father who might die in a German barn. The thought made something in his chest clench tight. He woke to the barn door opening, froze in the hay, hand moving to the pistol. Footsteps below, deliberate and careful. A woman's voice spoke in German, too quiet to make out words. Then, in accented English, "I know you are here, American. I saw you enter. You may come down, or I may call the patrol that is searching the forest. Your choice." Langford parted the hay slowly. The woman stood below, middle-aged, dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing a work dress and heavy sweater. No weapon visible. Her hands were empty, but her expression was unreadable in the shadows. He made a decision. He descended the ladder, pistol holstered but hand near it, and faced her in the barn's gloom. She studied him with eyes that had seen too much. "You are injured?" "Bruised. Nothing serious." His voice came out rougher than expected. "Your aircraft, the patrol found it. They are searching." She spoke precise English with barely a trace of accent. "You cannot stay here if they expand the search, but moving now would be suicide. They have dogs." "Why are you helping me?" "I have not decided if I am." She crossed her arms. "My name is Margarethe Schreiber. This is my property. My husband was Wehrmacht, killed in Normandy last year. The SS comes here sometimes looking for deserters, fugitives. If they find you, they will execute me. You understand this?" "I understand." Langford met her gaze. "I'm Everett Langford, 1st Lieutenant, Army Air Corps. Today was supposed to be my last mission. I was going home." Something flickered in her expression. "We all wish to go home, Lieutenant. The problem is deciding where home is anymore." She moved to the workbench, began arranging tools with the automatic movements of someone buying time to think. "You have a family?" "Wife, a son I've never met. He's 3 months old." Margarethe's hands stilled on a wrench. "I see." She turned back to him. "Then we have a problem, because I am also hiding 2 others. A German boy who deserted rather than die for a madman, and a Polish laborer who escaped from a work camp. If the SS finds any of you, we all die. Do you understand? Not just you, not just me. Everyone." The weight of it settled on Langford's shoulders. "I can leave, take my chances." "In daylight? With patrols and dogs?" She shook her head. "No. You would lead them back here when they caught you. You stay hidden. Tonight, we decide what happens next." She left before he could respond. Langford stood in the barn, surrounded by the smell of old machinery and his own fear, and wondered what kind of woman risked everything for strangers. The afternoon light shifted through the wall gaps. Somewhere outside, soldiers searched for him. Somewhere across an ocean, his son grew without him. And here, in this barn that smelled of rust and hay, his fate rested in the hands of a German widow who had every reason to turn him in. Evening brought 2 more refugees to the barn. The Polish laborer, thin as wire and speaking no English, nodded once at Langford and retreated to a corner. The German deserter was younger, maybe 19, with the haunted look of someone who'd seen too much too soon. He spoke careful English, learned in school before the war. "I am Jakob. I was with 15th Army. They sent us west to die, delaying the Americans. My entire company gone in 3 days. I walked away." He said it without shame. "I will not die for Hitler. Not now. Not when we have already lost." Margarethe brought bread and thin soup after dark. They ate in silence, listening to the distant sound of trucks on the road. She sat on a hay bale, studying Langford in the lamplight. "You can fly, yes? Any aircraft? I'm trained on single-engine fighters." "Why?" "Because there is a Messerschmitt Bf-19 in the field north of here, 3 kilometers. The pilot abandoned it 2 weeks ago when the engine failed. He fled west rather than be captured by the SS for desertion." She leaned forward. "I have been thinking, the SS will expand their search. We cannot hide here forever, but an aircraft could take you over the Allied lines." Langford stared at her. "You want me to steal a German fighter? I want you gone before you get me killed. The aircraft serves that purpose." Her voice was practical, almost cold. "Jakob here was a mechanic before they made him infantry. I worked in my father's machine shop before the war. Between us, perhaps we could repair it." "It's insane," Langford said. "Even if we got it running, flying a German fighter toward Allied lines, they'd shoot me down before I got within radio range. Then you paint American markings on it. Use fabric from the barn." She stood. "Or you can wait here and hope the SS doesn't find you. Your choice, Lieutenant, but decide quickly." The impossibility of it struck him. Repair an enemy aircraft with a German widow and a deserter, fly it over battle lines, somehow convince his own forces not to kill him. Every step offered a dozen ways to die. But the alternative was waiting in this barn until someone informed on them or a patrol got lucky. He thought of Thomas, of Emily's letters promising a life beyond this war, of the 74 missions that hadn't killed him yet. "Show me the aircraft," he said. They went at midnight, moving through fields black as pitch, guided by starlight and Margarethe's knowledge of the land. The temperature had dropped below freezing. Langford's breath misted in the air. They moved in single file, stopping frequently to listen. The front was close enough to hear artillery rumbling to the west like distant thunder. Closer, a patrol passed on the road, flashlights cutting the darkness. The Messerschmitt sat in the abandoned field like a wounded bird, wings intact but nose pointed at the earth where the landing gear had collapsed. Even in darkness, Langford could see it was a later model, sleek and deadly. He'd fought against these aircraft 100 times, danced with them at 20,000 feet. Now he'd have to make one carry him home. Jakob circled the aircraft, running his hands over the fuselage. Engine cowling is intact. The failure might be simple, fuel line perhaps, or electrical. He looked at Margarethe. We need tools, light to work by, parts if the damage is extensive. The tools are in my barn. Light we cannot risk until we are working. Parts, she trailed off. We salvage what we can. They worked through 3 nights. The first night was assessment. Jakob pulled the cowling and disappeared into the engine compartment with a hooded lamp, emerging an hour later with oil on his hands and cautious hope in his voice. Fuel pump failed. The rest looks intact. We need a replacement pump or the skill to repair this one. Margarethe studied the damaged component in the lamplight. Her fingers traced the mechanism with the confidence of someone who understood machines. I can fabricate parts. It will take time. The second night brought an SS patrol closer than before. They heard the vehicles on the road, the barking dogs, the harsh voices shouting orders. Margarethe killed the lamp, and they crouched in darkness beside the aircraft, hardly breathing. The patrol passed within 300 meters. When the sound faded, Jakob was shaking. They are looking for me, he said quietly. I should leave. Go west alone, before I bring death to all of you. No one leaves, Margarethe said. Her voice carried the weight of absolute decision. We finish this together or we die together. Those are the only choices left. The fuel pump came together slowly on her workbench in the barn. She worked in stolen hours, fabricating gaskets from rubber she'd been hoarding, machining parts with tools that belonged to a different era. Langford watched her hands move with precision and skill, creating something from nothing, and understood why she'd survived this far into the war. She was a builder in a world of destroyers. By the third night, they had the pump reassembled. The Polish laborer had contributed unexpected help, producing a can of aviation fuel he'd stolen from a Wehrmacht depot. They installed the pump by touch more than sight, Jakob's mechanical knowledge combining with Margarethe's improvisation. Langford stood watch, scanning the darkness for patrols, listening to the two of them work. Try it now, Jakob said finally. Margarethe moved to the cockpit. She'd spent the previous night learning the controls from Jakob's descriptions, refusing to waste time. The starter motor whined once, twice. On the third attempt, the engine caught, coughed, and roared to life. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the darkness. Margarethe killed it after 10 seconds, but those 10 seconds had confirmed the impossible. The aircraft could fly. Now we need to get it to take off position, Langford said, and paint markings before dawn. They worked through the night. The landing gear took 2 hours to repair enough for rolling. They pushed and pulled the aircraft into position on the flattest section of field, gambling everything on Langford's judgment of the distance needed. Margarethe had found white paint in her barn. They worked by starlight, painting crude American stars on the wings and fuselage. It wouldn't fool anyone on close inspection, but from distance, from another aircraft, it might buy seconds. Seconds could mean life. Dawn painted the eastern sky gray when they finished. They stood back, exhausted, looking at what they'd created. A German fighter wearing American markings, ready to carry an American pilot home. The absurdity of it would have been funny if lives didn't hang in the balance. Jakob gripped Langford's shoulder. Fly well, American. Tell them we did not all believe the lies. I will. Langford turned to Margarethe. Thank you. I know what you risked. She met his eyes. Take me with you. The words hung in the cold morning air. Langford stared at her. What? Take me with you. To the American lines. Her voice was steady, but her hands were clenched tight. The SS will come again, closer each time. When they find what we have done here, they will execute everyone in the village. Jakob can flee east ahead of your advance. The Polish worker will fade into the chaos. But I am known here. My husband's name is on their lists. I have no escape unless you take me. The aircraft is designed for one pilot. Your weight would cut the range, maybe prevent takeoff entirely. I might not make it even alone. Then we both take the chance. She stepped closer. Or I call the patrol now. Tell them an American is stealing their aircraft. It ends for both of us. Langford looked at this woman who had saved him, fed him, risked everything. He thought of the choice she faced. Certain death if she stayed, possible death if she came. He thought of Emily and Thomas, of going home, of becoming the kind of man his son could respect. Get in, he said. The Messerschmitt had a cramped cockpit designed for one. Margarethe wedged herself behind the seat, kneeling in the space meant for radio equipment. making herself as small as possible. Langford strapped in, hands moving over controls that were familiar yet foreign. German instruments, German labels, but the basics were universal. Stick, throttle, rudder pedals. An aircraft was an aircraft. He primed the engine. It caught on the second try, settling into a rough idle. The fuel gauge showed half full, maybe enough for 100 kilometers if they were lucky. The Allied lines were 60 kilometers west. Possible, maybe. "Hold on," he called back to Margarethe. He pushed the throttle forward. The Messerschmitt rolled across the field, picking up speed, the engine note rising. The tail lifted. The field was rougher than it looked, the aircraft bouncing, threatening to catch a gear and cartwheel. Langford held it steady, feeling for the moment when wings would take the weight. The trees at the field's end rushed closer, still too slow. Margarethe's weight was the difference between flight and death. 50 meters to the trees. 40. The airspeed indicator crept upward. 30 meters. He eased back on the stick. The wheels lifted, dropped, lifted again. The aircraft clawed for altitude, engines screaming. The trees filled his vision. They cleared the top branches by less than 2 meters. They were flying. The impossible had become real. Langford banked west, climbing slowly, nursing every meter of altitude from the overloaded aircraft. Below, the German countryside spread in dawn light. Ahead, somewhere beyond the horizon, the war continued. Behind, the field where they'd worked 3 nights was empty except for their tracks in the frost. The radio crackled to life in German. A fighter control station, calling for identification. Langford ignored it. Let them wonder. Let them scramble interceptors. By the time anyone responded, he'd be across the lines or dead. 10 minutes into the flight, Margarethe spoke behind him. "My husband's last letter. He wrote that he no longer knew what we were fighting for, that the officers spoke of victory while everyone else saw only death. He asked me to forgive him for believing the lies." Her voice was barely audible over the engine. "I never answered that letter. He was killed before I could. He would understand what you're doing now. Perhaps, or perhaps he would see it as betrayal." She paused. "I no longer care. I am tired of choosing between different kinds of death." The front line appeared as a scar across the landscape. Artillery positions, trenches, the brown ruin of contested ground. Langford descended to treetop height, making the Messerschmitt a difficult target. Anti-aircraft fire erupted from German positions. Black puffs blossomed around them. He jinked left, right, threading between the bursts. The aircraft shuddered as shrapnel peppered the fuselage. They crossed into no man's land. Allied positions ahead. American anti-aircraft opened up, not distinguishing friend from foe. More black bursts. A hole appeared in the wing. The engine coughed. Langford fought to maintain altitude, knowing they'd never survive a crash landing under fire. Then he saw them. 2 P-47 Thunderbolts diving from altitude, coming to kill what they thought was a German fighter. Langford yanked the stick, the Messerschmitt rolling desperately. The Thunderbolts flashed past, banking hard for another pass. They'd be back in seconds. He reached for the radio. "American aircraft! American aircraft! This is First Lieutenant Everett Langford, Army Air Corps, flying stolen enemy aircraft. Do not fire! Do not fire!" No response. The Thunderbolts lined up for their attack run. Langford repeated the message. Behind him, Margarethe began screaming in English, her voice high and desperate, the unmistakable sound of a woman terrified and trapped. The Thunderbolts broke off, circled. One pulled alongside, close enough for Langford to see the pilot's stunned expression. The radio crackled. "Say again. You're American, Lieutenant Everett Langford. Shot down 3 days ago. Flying stolen Bf-19 with German civilian who helped me escape. Requesting immediate landing clearance before someone else shoots us down." A long pause. Then, "Follow me, and Langford, this better not be a trick." They landed at an airfield 10 minutes later. The Messerschmitt touching down on a runway meant for bombers, Margarethe still wedged behind the seat. Intelligence officers surrounded the aircraft before the propeller stopped spinning. Langford climbed out with his hands visible, helping Margarethe down. She stood on the tarmac, surrounded by American soldiers, and swayed. He caught her arm. "We made it," he said. "No." Her voice was flat. "You made it. I am now your prisoner." They took her away. Langford tried to follow, was blocked by an intelligence captain who had 100 questions. He answered them mechanically, watching Margarethe disappear into a building with barred windows. By the time they finished debriefing him, she was gone. "Transferred to a POW facility," they said. "Civilian detainee. Standard procedure." "She saved my life," Langford said. "She risked everything." "That's noted in the report, Lieutenant. But she's still an enemy national. The process has to be followed. The process took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Langford filing reports, making statements, requesting hearings. His squadron had moved forward with the advance. The war ground toward its end. But Langford remained at the rear echelon, fighting a different battle through paperwork and bureaucracy. He learned where Margarethe was held, wrote letters to commanders, made calls, used every contact he had. The captain who'd debriefed him found him in the officers' mess on the 21st day. "Your German friend. She's being released. You made enough noise that it got to someone who actually has authority." He dropped papers on the table. "She's your responsibility now. Immigration to figure out later. Congratulations, Lieutenant. You're officially the biggest pain in the ass I've dealt with this month." Langford found her at the detention facility. She wore the same clothes from 3 weeks before, looked thinner and older, but her eyes were dry. She'd survived. "I told them everything," he said as they walked toward the processing office. "About Jakob, the Polish worker, what you risked. About the Messerschmitt. They're listing you as a friendly civilian who aided Allied personnel." "Aided?" A bitter smile. "Is that what we call it?" "What would you call it?" She stopped walking, looked at him. "I would call it choosing to be human when being human had become almost impossible." She resumed walking. "Where do I go now?" "I have a wife, a son, in Michigan." He hesitated. "She knows about you. I wrote to her. She wants to meet the woman who made sure I came home." The war ended 3 weeks later. Langford returned stateside with his squadron, paperwork already in motion for Margarethe's immigration. It took another 6 months, but she followed. Emily met her at the train station, Thomas on her hip. The two women looked at each other across the platform, measuring. "Thank you for sending him back," Emily said finally. "Thank you for accepting what I had to become to do it," Margarethe replied. The years that followed were simpler. Margarethe opened a machine shop in Detroit, her skill with tools finding ready market in post-war industry. She never married again, never spoke much about the war. But she came to Sunday dinners at the Langford house, became an aunt to Thomas and the 2 siblings who followed. Taught all 3 children how to fix engines, how to build things, how to solve problems that seemed impossible. Langford returned to the airfield once more, in 1963, for an air show featuring restored warbirds. He stood with Thomas, 17 now, watching a Messerschmitt Bf-109 take to the sky. Same model, same paint scheme. "You never told me the whole story," Thomas said, "about how you got home." Langford watched the Messerschmitt climb, remembering dawn light and an overloaded aircraft and a German widow who'd gambled everything on the chance that mercy might be repaid. The whole story is that sometimes going home requires you to take responsibility for the people who made it possible. Your Aunt Margarethe didn't just help me escape. She taught me that even in war, we choose what kind of men we become. The Messerschmitt rolled overhead, graceful and deadly. Thomas put his arm around his father's shoulders. In the parking lot, Margarethe waited beside her truck, the bed loaded with engine parts for the shop. She'd watched the takeoff from a distance. Some flights you only needed to witness once. The sky held the aircraft for another moment, then it banked west, following a path first flown 18 years before, by a pilot who'd learned that the hardest missions weren't the ones where you fought the enemy. They were the ones where you discovered the enemy was as human as yourself, and then had to decide what that meant. Langford had made his choice in a dark barn in southern Germany. The choice had made him. If you have enjoyed the story, tell YouTube to send you more stories like this by subscribing to this channel, liking the video, and leaving a comment.